The following is my conversation with David Millar. David is a former professional cyclist turned entrepreneur and cycling industry insider. Currently based in Girona, Spain, Millar shares his journey from professional cycling to founding the clothing brand Chpt3. With remarkable candor, he discusses his Scottish roots, formative years in Hong Kong, and the challenges of transitioning from professional cycling to being a small business owner. The conversation offers valuable insights into the cycling industry, brand positioning, and the difficulties of scaling a niche business. Millar also discusses his new role with Factor Bikes, where he's bringing his marketing expertise to a company focusing on manufacturing excellence. This is the Business of Cycling podcast. David Millar, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time today. So I imagine you've got a lot of things going on, but where does this podcast find you today?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on. It's quite good to be on a business podcast. Kind of, yeah, brave new world. I'm in Girona. I'm sitting in the Factor office because Factor have their European base here, and they'd kindly given me a space here before with Chpt3, and we'll get onto that. But I'll be doing more work with Factor now, so
Okay.
I'm just in here.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Girona, very nice place. What's the weather like this time of year?
The weather is absolutely stunning. I
Okay.
mean, it's been a bit hit and miss last couple of months, but I kind of at the majority of Christmases we've spent here. I mean, I've been here 18 years. It's
Oh,
almost
wow.
always,
You're an
it's
OG.
almost, I am the OG. Yeah. It's my fault, a lot of it. Yeah, no, it's lovely. It's beautiful. It's,
Okay. Well, yeah, we can dive into some of the, I didn't realize you were the OG Girona guy, so we can dive into
mm,
that too.
yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, I guess today we're going to talk about your kind of genesis, your origin story from a business standpoint,
Mm.
and kind of go through that. And again, I appreciate you coming on today. Hopefully we'll have some fun and people can learn more about you and your story. So where, I guess, start from the beginning. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you study? All that good stuff.
Yeah. Problems a little bit complex for me. I mean, I've lived in 6 different countries
Well, I saw
and
Hong Kong on your LinkedIn. So
yeah,
yeah.
Malta, Scotland, England, Hong Kong, France, Spain. So yeah, I had a fairly transient youth. I'm Scottish, but I had a Scottish accent until I was 7. And then in order to fit in England, my sister and I pretty much removed our Scottish accents.
What is
But
a Scottish accent? I guess for the global crowd that doesn't know the ins and outs of regional intricacies, what does a Scottish accent do to someone in England? Does it kind of pin them into a corner, or what does that mean?
No, not at all. I mean, it's a lovely accent, but I think when you're a kid arriving in a new primary school in the south of England, it's
You want to fit
probably
in?
better. You want to fit in. You
Yeah,
don't want to stand out. And yeah, being the only 2 kids there with Scottish accents wasn't conducive to fitting in.
sure.
So, and then over time, my accent even morphed when I went to Hong Kong because it kind of went from quite a Thames Valley English accent into a bit more of an international accent. And since then, it's become pretty much neutral. But yeah, I'm Scottish through and through, but in classic Scottish fashion. I'm an expat through and through as well. So, but I've been now in Girona, yeah, for the majority of my adult life, and it's home now.
And so you went to Hong Kong. I mean, did you grow
So
up
I,
like with a
yeah,
family, like a professional family that moved because of work, or why did you move to Hong Kong?
I was a military kid.
Oh, okay.
So my dad was Royal Air Force, which was the first bit of travel. He was a wing commander, and my parents got divorced late 80s. My dad left the Air Force and became an airline pilot and went to Hong Kong. So I was in Hong Kong from 1990 to 95, which arguably were the ultimate boom years in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
just because it was pre 97 hangover,
sure.
hangover, Freudian slip there, handover.
Handover,
Um,
hangover, handover,
it
hangover.
was if I think everybody was living in a hangover, kind of building up to it because I think it felt like the end of an era. Well, it was the end of an era. It was those final days of British colony, and it still had the vestiges of colonial life, like clubs. And I grew up in different clubs, yacht clubs, military clubs.
Because with your
Yeah.
money goes a long ways, or at least it used to in Hong Kong. So you probably had like access to a pretty decent lifestyle when you were there.
Yeah, and it was still, as I said, it was the final years of the kind of the expat life where if you kind of moved over there, there are a huge amount of subsidies paid by the companies that people work for,
Sure.
paid for schooling, accommodation. And so I mean, I went to a British school out there, the only British school. I was Kowloon side. So I was, when you, all those iconic images of Hong Kong are the island from Kowloon side, from the mainland. And we were in probably, I think it's the oldest school in Hong Kong, KG5, King George V. And it was in the heart of, just on the edge of Mong Kok, in between Mong Kok and Kowloon City. So a kilometre, well, less than a kilometre from our school, which was this beautiful old expat school, which had been built in the 1920s with playing fields and everything. Less than a kilometre from there was the most densely populated square kilometre in the world. And, you know, there are pictures of our school when it was built, and it was just surrounded by fields and rice paddy fields. And so it was an amazing place to grow up, because we were in these, we had the traditional British school uniform, and we'd walk out and we were in the heart of bustling Hong Kong.
That's wild.
And the only kind of white kids, the Guilos. And then we had the Kai Tak airport literally a kilometre the other way. So it was, I mean, it was a surreal place to grow up, and it was formative in many ways. And I think anybody who lived there in that era is haunted by just how amazing it was. It never leaves you. So yeah, so I'm a Hong Kong kid. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So I spent my adolescence there. So adolescence being such a kind of bedrock for the rest of your life.
Totally.
There's no doubt
for anybody.
Yeah, my heart kind of remains Hong Kong in many ways. But
you get back?
As it does. No, I haven't been back since my 40th birthday, so 7 years ago. But I still have a lot of friends out there. It's Ruggiero, Rog, my best friend from school, who's out there. But no, I don't, unfortunately. But I hear it's changed a lot. So there's a part of me that doesn't really want to go back. I'd rather just leave it locked in as it was, because it was pretty magical, and I'll just keep it there banked.
Something that I wanted to talk about today, and we was just kind of, you know, what was your journey as a professional after cycling, or I guess during cycling and then after cycling? Because as far as like business opportunities that came about while riding, I presume that you had to sort of manage your image in a way that was conducive to, you know, sponsorships and partnerships and things like that. So maybe do you want to just talk a little bit about kind of how you saw that as a professional rider in terms of kind of your likeness and your personal brand, how you've managed that over the years before we get into like any of the ventures that you did? I think that could be really interesting for people to kind of understand a little more about.
My career in pro cycling and the relationship I had with partners was probably quite unique, in the sense the sport was very different to what it is now, is probably an understatement. When I turned professional, I signed my first contract in 1996 when I was 19, turned pro in 1997. And I say often to people now that the sport has changed more in the past 10 years from when I retired in 2014 than it had in the previous 50. It's fundamentally different. So I came into it, and the relationship between riders and sponsors was basically, riders didn't have anything to do with sponsors. You know, there was a quite a big firewall. You know,
so you weren't curating your personal brand at all. You were just focused on riding, and that was it.
Yeah, not at the time. I mean, the internet didn't exist effectively.
Right. So you were just sort of a horse in the stable, and that was it.
Yeah, and you do your interviews, and I was on French team that first part of my career, so getting an interview in L'Equipe would be a big deal. You know, Velo magazine. It was magazines, newspapers, and being a British rider, kind of getting in the broadsheets, the main papers in the UK would be a big deal. But we had a fairly small footprint. Our presence was our results. There was no kind of subsidiary sort of vehicle. There was nothing that you could use. You'd very rarely have personal sponsors unless you were one of the big riders.
Sure.
And I had, in that early part of my career, Oakley and CD. And you know, that was a pretty big deal to have Oakley at the time. Oakley was still in its kind of, compared to today, quite infant.
So you had a personal contract with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had a great relationship with them. And, you know, Oakley was still the kind of the outlier kind of hipster brand at the time.
Sure.
So
you were one of the few riders that sort of did kind of rise above the fold in that regard. And was that
Yeah, I
something
did.
that you were always curious about and that you always wanted to have? Because I mean, you're a good-looking guy. You seem to be pretty agile around this type of stuff, and saying that it was different then, but it was always something that you were conscious of. Is that fair?
Yeah, it was because I mean, I think also going back to how the world was so different, I wrote columns for magazines,
Oh wow.
in those early years.
Okay.
I'd have regular columns in Cycle Sport. I came across them all recently, and I was like, holy crap, I was doing that monthly back in the kind of late 90s, early
Why were you
2000s.
doing that?
It was an outlet, number one. I mean, I think it was mixed in the sense that at that point in my career, I wanted to have more of a profile, and I enjoyed the creative side. It was kind of because there was so little. I kind of thought, well, what would I want to know? Kind of
About the yeah.
because
So it's sort of
because
the OG kind of, behind the scenes, because right now behind the scenes is huge.
that's the
Huge.
majority.
Yeah,
Yeah, the majority of output is behind the scenes, but back then it didn't exist. It was kind of
right.
race reports,
Sure.
profiles. There was nothing kind of first person from the athletes. It was like behind the curtain.
Right.
And I think again that goes back to the fact that a lot of the, as I said, it was very different. I mean, the cyclists had. I came from my background, and I didn't actually mention my education. I was going to go to art college,
You went
so
okay, so more of the
I was
creative
going to go.
side.
Yeah, and I was curious, and I read a lot, and having things to do kind of around the sport. And the reason I got into professional cycling was I came across it in Hong Kong, was introduced to it, and I found the whole sport just wild and interesting and romantic, and I was so curious about it. And I read all the books, and there weren't that many at the time, and try and get as many magazines. So I was fascinated by the whole thing. So the whole culture of the sport was really interesting to me, and I found it curious. So I enjoyed being part of that. And then being part of that side where you were telling the stories and kind of sharing as you said, the insider's view and kind of what it was like, because there, as you say, there wasn't any of that going on at the time. So going back to kind of that was a part of the sport that didn't really exist at the time. It was something I saw, oh, I can do that. And people are open to kind of giving me the outlet to do it. And and then at the same time, going back to kind of partnerships and relationships, I was an absolute tech geek, and I loved bikes. I mean, I was a time trial. I'd chosen to kind of really focus on time trial in my early career because I realized that was where I could win and I didn't need to dope when I was young. It was something that there was. We talk about marginal gains so much then, but it was possible in the late 90s and early 2000s to make significant gains
Sure.
by simply caring more, by
Right.
training more specific, by actually wanting a time trial bike at home to train on. I mean, I even for the 2000 Tour de France, where I won the first stage, uh, I bought the wheel. I the equipment kind of I'd sourced all that bike, and had the mechanic and gone against taking the wrath of what the sponsors might say. And I was doing that right up until 2014. I mean, I was on the internet in 2010, kind of ordering ceramic bearings from the States and getting Dugas tires. And, it's all those things were the things that I really cared about and loved. And I think mechanics started to realize that I really cared. And they would then actually let me through the firewall to speak to sponsors, because often a lot of the time, the fact that I was getting so frustrated, they'd have to give me access to the sponsors to kind of actually see that I wanted stuff they couldn't supply. And that was very much, I think, because I had such good relationships with the mechanics, because I cared so much about my bikes, that started to give me entry into the kind of speaking to the sponsors. But I think it really didn't come, that sort of didn't really sort of actually start to make a difference and find a sponsor who was really invested until I met Steve Smith, Castelli. He'd taken over Castelli, was it 2005, and was rebooting the brand and coming in with Steve Smith's kind of
Nike.
absolute passion.
Yeah, and Nike
Yeah,
background.
I mean, he's just one of the most inspiring people I've met in the world of cycling. And Steve and he just absolutely loved my passion for it and knew I'd test anything, would try anything. And so that was where kind of for the first time in my career that I found somebody at a sponsor who was open to kind of listening to me and working with me and actually teaching me and being there. But apart from that, it was pretty hard. With bikes, you have almost no input,
Right.
because I mean, to be honest, it's so beyond us. Apparel is one thing, bikes is another.
Yeah. Well,
But
and the curve of actually implementing it for bikes, I imagine, is probably, just kind of outside the
yeah,
scope of day to day.
completely. Yeah, and they don't really want to be giving prototypes. They don't want to risk an athlete kind of having an accident on a prototype bike. And obviously now, since the UCI don't allow prototype bikes in races, etc., it's the UCI rules, rightfully so. So bikes was one thing, but again, going back to bikes, it was with felt. I kind of still say that my favorite bike from my pro career were my 2010 felts, and that was when Jim Felt was still involved. And Jim was really passionate, and that was something I kind of learned over the years, that the brands where the founder owner was still involved and loved racing. It was so they were they were the best because the racing was almost kind of their raison d'être. That's kind of what they loved, and that's what they were passionate about. So having the good fortune to have a team that had a sponsor with that kind of key person in charge was the dream. But that wasn't my call. That was just serendipity. And it was the same with Physique. Physique were great. Physique, I listened to your podcast with Nicolo Ildos. I was there with Nicolo, and I was there developing shoes with them. And so I'd say through my career, there were only three brands that were really proactive. And that was Felt when Jim Felt was there, Physique and the Celi Royale team and Nicolo Ildos and Steve Smith at Castelli. They were the ones that were kind of, and they opened my eyes to kind of what it was like, kind of how it operated. Because as a pro cyclist, you just, the amount of times we kick up fuss like prima donnas because you can't get that in time for me, or why aren't you doing this? We don't actually realize that often it's an 18-month development cycle,
Right.
and it's not as simple. And actually, they've got a whole business to run. They can't
Yeah.
dedicate all these
Exactly.
resources to this niche need that you want. But yeah, and I've learned that all the more of this past decade.
So that's so you're able to work and you're able to see the product side, and then I guess I guess before we get into chapter 3, you've always, at least I've been around cycling and working in cycling since around 2013, and you've always had a really strong persona, whether that's deliberate or whether that's by chance, but having started that company, and you're really visible with the collaboration with Castelli and the collaboration with Brompton. Is that something that you did deliberately, or is that something that, because it sounds like you've always been sort of a student of the communication side of things, because you had mentioned that you were very sensitive to the opportunity to talk about behind the scenes. You got into the product, so it just feels like a natural kind of thing where that you would be able to try and be at the forefront of that, being a cyclist, ex pro cyclist. So it sort of just makes sense that you would be out there. Was that something you did deliberately, or is it something that just sort of happened?
No, deliberately for sure, because I thought I was going to race until I was 40. I mean, I was kind of, which would have taken me to 2017. But in 2012, 2013, the wheels fell off mentally. Now in hindsight, I can see I was tired. I was burnt out. I'd been going flat out for 17 years. And I think also the comeback from the ban, I can look back on that now and seen that had been 8 years of kind of to the grindstone in my anti-doping fight, as well as my racing career, and also being part of the kind of management and ownership of Team Garmin.
So you sort of
And so
reached your limit, like your kind of mental
you,
limit, where it was like,
mental limit, just
yeah,
couldn't do it anymore. And I
yeah.
couldn't push myself. I couldn't hurt myself. And I didn't, you don't,
Your body will turn on you at that point. Like you just can't,
100%.
yeah,
And
you
I
can't convince it.
you don't recognize it at the time because you
No,
think suddenly I've got old, my body can't do it anymore. And it's only years later I realize, oh shit, I was probably physically
exhausted.
still there.
Yeah.
But the moment your head goes, especially in cycling, I mean, all sports like that, but I think cycling, where it requires such deep mental resources to kind of go as hard as we need to consistently, that the moment that kind of flame dims, it's game over. And that decline and fall is very quickly. And often it happens you don't see it as a first person because it's impossible to see. It's only years later you recognize it. But yeah, in 2014, I knew it was my last year, and I hadn't, like all professional cyclists, there's no sort of transition
No,
kind of
no,
plan,
there's not.
which is
Because you,
something that I can, yeah,
right, you get
it's
to the
something,
you get to the edge and you're like, oh, okay, now. I mean, tell us about that.
yeah,
I guess I'm just assuming, but what does that feel like when you're at the edge and then it's like, oh God, now what do I do?
yeah, it's daunting. I mean, I go as far as saying scary because I mean, when I ran for the CPA presidency in I can't remember 2016 or something, one of my mandates was to kind of create a transition program. I mean, I'd almost go as far as kind of rehabilitation. So it's like military demobbing. But yeah, we didn't have any of that, and so I had to kind of think. One thing I did know, I didn't want to stay in the racing world in the sense that I'd had the best job in the racing world, and I don't have. And part of my burnout was just living in that kind of season in, season out routine, which I couldn't do it anymore. So I was trying to think of a way to to carry on my life in cycling, but on my own terms. And it was the reason I hadn't gone to art college was because I wanted to be a pro cyclist. But that kind of passion for art, design, creativity had never dimmed. And I saw an opportunity to kind of take that and go and work with some of those relationships, those people I'd worked with, and propose doing something different. And it was actually with Nicola Oldos and Physique when we'd done in my final year of racing, we designed a different pair of shoes for every race as a
Wow.
kind of this
That,
crazy
that
project.
is
It was
crazy.
awesome. Yeah, it was crazy. It was like there were, and I kind of suddenly realized, oh, this is cool. I could go in and sort of do creative stuff with these tech brands.
Sure.
And and one of my biggest things was, well, what am I going to wear when I retire? Kind of when I ride my bike. And there wasn't a brand out there that I kind of felt strongly about or wanted to be associated with. Castelli, of course, but then it was again, I wanted to do something different that was my own. And so I went to Steve Smith and proposed this idea of creating a kind of collection that was exactly what I wanted to wear. I remember the first, I don't want to be a human billboard because since I'd been a teenager, I'd just been wearing kit that other people had given me and it was all branded. And I wanted to disappear and kind of do something that was much more tilted towards style, kind of not losing the tech, but adding some style and elegance. And I didn't want to use my name because I understood like very strongly that I was a depreciating asset. That every pro athlete is. I mean, there's only a very few kind of pro athletes that can retire and maintain their worth, their value. You know, you have to be one of the biggest names in global sport effectively to be able to continue and have the right partners. So I came up with the idea of creating a brand, and the name Chpt3 was the next chapter. And it felt like Chpt3. The original was because my career was two halves. Kind of, there was this first act, a second act, kind of either side of the doping ban. And this felt like a third act. And like any third act, it felt like resolution. This is what I want to do now going forward. It's Chpt3. And Steve Smith at Cassidy was up for it. And which was amazing. And Steve gave me complete creative control to do something, to create a collection of apparel that was very much exactly what I wanted. I kind of banned black. I wanted an almost military palette to it. It's a mix between Savile Row and military. And we had almost no branding on it. We did green shorts, like army green shorts and navy blue. And it was so far ahead of its time.
It was.
I mean,
I agree.
nobody was doing anything like that. And Nadav Kanda did the photography for the studio photography. And Nadav Kanda is the guy who recently did the Fear of God Adidas collection. Kind of, you know, we were doing stuff that nobody had done before, but it was way too far ahead of the curve. I think it inspired a lot of people, but we didn't have the right kind of audience, I don't think, to do it, and well, we didn't have any audience.
Yeah, it
So
was.
it was
Well, from me, from the outside, it felt like really expensive, but it was
mm,
like, but now looking back, it's like, well, I mean, look what's happening now. Like, I think
yeah,
being ahead of the curve is absolutely spot on because look at some of the brands
mm,
are just going off the charts pricey.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's bad. And ours was because I mean the jersey we made we were using, that was the great thing with Steve. Chapter 3 almost became a skunk works for him. We were using fabrics that he couldn't justify using in Castelli mainline. And we were doing things, construction methods that they couldn't use. And so it was a kind of a skunk works for Castelli, and it then gave me the kind of vehicle to create the brand and build the brand.
Sure.
And then
So
with
was Castelli a part owner at the beginning or no?
no,
They were
it was
just
just a
a
licensing deal. It
okay.
was a
Wow.
licensed Chpt3 to them. Yeah, no, Steve was
He
so
gave you
generous, and
he gave you a lot of
yeah,
firepower too. I
he
remember
gave me an
like
enormous amount. Yeah, and
yeah,
as I said, Steve is one of the people in the industry that I've got the most admiration for, because there's nobody who knows as much as him. Number one, regards kind of technical apparel. Like, I mean, he lives and breathes it. He loves racing, and he's just such a kind and considerate and thoughtful guy.
he
He's just an
really
amazing human
he
being.
really is.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to interview him 2 weeks ago, and I only kind of didn't really know him that well. Just had met him, met him a bunch of times, but always, kind of because there isn't a lot on the internet about him, right? Because
No, that's it's no ego with Steve.
he's not on
There's no ego.
LinkedIn. I
Yeah.
mean, he does a little bit on Instagram, so it's like he's kind of a mystery. But I was
Mm,
so happy to be able to talk to him because it really filled in a lot of the blanks, and he is an absolute joy of a person, of a
mm.
human being.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
he's one of good people.
when
There's
you
no
hear
doubt
this,
about it.
I'm not going to spoil it, but the story is pretty cool too. So I'm sure you know most of it,
Yeah.
but I'm sure
Yeah,
there's
yeah, I do.
some new.
I do know it very
So
well.
you had this jog. I mean, it felt to me like you had a real like a great launch because you had Castelli helping you design with the fabrics, and then you had kind of the launch of being a top end kind of clothing brand. I know you were probably a little bit ahead of the time, but was it initially somewhat profitable?
Yeah, it did at the beginning. I mean, we could get through. I think that in hindsight, because we were dependent on the Castelli distribution network, uh, it wasn't necessarily the right audience for that. And I didn't we didn't build any community. We didn't go out there and do on the ground stuff. There was a lot that I got wrong
And
that,
you didn't have your own D2C site at the beginning
not at
either?
that point,
Oh,
not at that point.
wow. Oh,
No, no,
man.
no. Yeah, yeah. It was all, I mean, we've kind of then that happened 2 years later,
Okay.
and
Sure.
so I mean, in many ways, kind of going through that process has been really interesting because Castelli kind of did it for 4 years, and then we moved out. It kind of came to its end with them, because we couldn't get traction with it,
Right.
and then we went and made our own made our own, but then
Okay.
that was during the pandemic, and it just ended up being an absolute cluster. And I kind of couldn't. The product wasn't good enough. I'd, I'd I'd taken some of the wrong advice that we needed to go for a lower price point.
Sure.
We needed to make it a more D2C business at a more accessible price point, bring in black, do this, make it simpler. And, it was explained to me that, and I said, okay, maybe that makes sense. It didn't feel right to me, but I thought, well, they know. My partners at the time were had a lot of success in the cycling business world, and so I was like, well, they'd know best. Let's go for it. But what I didn't anticipate was that the core niche audience we had really did like the fact it was expensive and hard to get. And we also introduced a women's range because we thought, well, I've taken a bit of flack and I was a little bit uncomfortable, especially around that period, about not doing women's apparel. And my wife's a super keen cyclist, and my sister, I thought I should make stuff. And again, we'd only done men's apparel up to that point. So lowered the price point, brought in a women's range, extended the range, and
That's a
confused the hell out of our customers.
Yeah, I mean, that sound from my vantage point, it sounds like you sort of turned your back on the initial learning. Because did you have some positive feedback from the initial collection? I mean, even though you were going through Castelli's distribution network, which, to bring in that stuff into a store
Mm.
at that price point, that feels to me like a pretty big, but maybe you had some online resellers that had a little bit of success, perhaps
A,
initially.
a, a little bit. One of the weird things with Chpt3 is it's the nostalgia is pretty big for it in that first collection and kind of what we did at the beginning.
Hmm.
because I think time people now get it more. But the bottom line is it didn't work as a
It
business,
didn't.
kind
Okay.
of
You
doing,
weren't like it wasn't self-sustaining.
no, not in the way we were doing it.
Okay. So
And but
you had to make a move. You had to make some kind of a
had to
move.
make a move, and I went for the kind of the safe move and the kind of what the kind of what the numbers said was the
Sure.
right move across the industry.
Well, I
Um,
mean, there's no crystal ball that you can just buy and, and tell you where to go.
no,
You gotta try
no,
something. You gotta
yeah, and
try.
it was, and I kind of went against my, I went down that kind of growth. How do we grow?
Sure.
Well, we have to kind of do things differently, do what other people do, and kind of, and and again with hindsight, that at the time it was the right decision. But in hindsight, that we were just doing what everyone else was doing, and we've seen how saturated the market is. And
That was a
the
tough
bigger,
time. I mean, around COVID,
yeah,
like everybody decided that they were going to have a cycling clothing brand. Like everybody, I've written
yeah,
about this
eh,
ad
yeah,
nauseum because
it's
it
wild.
it's tough because you know people can just wake up one day and be like, "Hey, Nalini, can you make me some kit?" And then
Yeah,
go do a shooting at Girona and
yeah,
so you
get some
probably
socials.
yep get some
Yeah,
socials going. So you were probably in terms of like headwinds to relaunch Chapter 3, you probably were at a bit of a disadvantage. It sounds like.
hugely. I mean, I think, but again, with hindsight, I don't think it was also a huge opportunity at the time. If I'd known what I know now, to kind of double down on what we were doing, take the learnings from that first collection, refine it, stick to men only, go super technical, and keep it a really narrow offering, and kind of just double down on that niche. That small market share, which we could have kind of begun to own. The problem was the market did expand there for a while, but then actually, as you say, the the slices of the pie just got smaller and smaller for everybody,
Everybody.
and uh,
Everybody.
and everybody was going for the same slice of pie,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah. Even
So
even Steve. I know,
yeah,
he was not spared. Like nobody was spared.
mm,
Nobody.
nobody. And I think one of the biggest learnings for me over these years is the fact that cycling is a niche sport. No matter kind of we can amp the numbers up as much as we want, you know,
Absolutely.
which everyone
Nobody.
does. In their decks, they're kind of all the investment decks. This is like, look at the kind of potential it
Yeah.
has.
It's
Yeah, okay. But actually when you look at it, and it is a pretty small place, but it's a really interesting place. And if you kind of understand the niche and you kind of go down this, actually, this is something like, I was saying this to somebody recently. I was told by two different people in those early years, kind of, and they gave me this advice. And when I was talking about what we are going to do with Chpt3 and this and that, and I was like, well, just choose one thing and do that one thing
own
really
it.
well.
Own it.
Own it.
Yep.
And 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 I thought, oh well, one thing is kind of cycle apparel. We can do men's apparel, we can do off-road apparel, we can do women's. But actually, and I considered those, I kind of blinkered myself into thinking that was all one thing.
It's not.
Now it's not,
It's
and
absolutely
that's what
not.
now I look back and I go, oh, the one thing was just doing men's apparel, super tech
Premium.
with a super cool
Premium. Yep.
premium with a beautiful brand and
It,
marketing, and that was one thing.
no,
So yeah,
I appreciate your candor because in business, like it's brutal. It's a brutal grind. Like you have to just get punched in the face so many times before you can actually, be successful, right? Because you
mm,
have to fail. You have to get through these things because nobody's going to tell you and there's no playbook.
yeah,
You have to get
yeah.
into it, you have to try it, and then you have to start over if it doesn't go well.
Yeah,
And
and I think I was also, it was a blessing and a curse, my naivety and kind of my beginner's mindset. Sort of beginner's mindset is great, but my beginner's mindset is I love design, I love cycling, I wanted to do everything at once. I was kind of I couldn't say no to anything. Because I was curious and I kind of was passionate about all these little things. So it was this wonderful learning kind of experience, but a very costly one. It's a, it's cost me a fortune. But at the same time, you get absolute clarity. Kind of, it was all those mistakes that I made that have given me a clarity that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't made all those mistakes, and kind of, which has been really interesting because it was easy to think what wasn't being done could be done because you thought, well, you just haven't tried. But no, everybody's tried everything. It's like
Sort
they
of, yeah.
genuinely have, but
Sort of,
effectively.
yeah.
And so going down to that kind of idea, well, kind of how do you double down? How do you find that one thing and really kind of own it? And that's where the cycling industry is interesting because you'll know this as well. One of the things I noticed very quickly in those first few years when I was properly kind of meeting people from different brands and different things, almost every brand had this amazing kind of owner, founder who was passionate about that one niche in the sport. If you go to a mountain biking brand, the person who kind of founded it is a mountain biker. If you go to a road cycling brand, the guy is a road cycling. They're fans. They're complete fans of the sport.
You have
And
to. You have to be.
yeah, you have to. You have to
Because
be. And if
you're talking to people. Sorry to interrupt you, but I gotta
mm,
jump in here, man.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
teeing it up for me. This sport, the people that do this sport are spending their money, their hard-earned disposable income, and when they do it, they want to be cared for in a very specific way, right?
mm,
And so when you
yeah,
do this sport and when you make products for this sport, you cannot mess around because people
no,
will notice.
yeah. And I think that's where it kind of it really. I think we're seeing that more. If we go back to kind of the early days of cycling, kind of the frame builders, they were all artisans, or craftsmen. You really bought into that human behind the brand, and cycling is at its core is very much like that still. It's still people want to know the founder. They want to know kind of why they're doing it. They want to buy into the human story behind the product. And and that's been lost a lot of late, I think. I mean, I think it's become a bit different. But some of
Well,
the strongest brands are still like that.
the industrialization of it, where I think some investment
Mm,
funds came in, and I don't, it's to sound really just frank about it, it's there's not a ton of money in this business
no, not
at
true.
the end of the day because there's so many people that just want to be in it and
Yeah.
they're willing to earn less just to be in it. So you're paying this
Hmm.
premium to be in it, and then again it's very niche. It's
Hmm.
just a small market. And so having all these people wanting to be in it, it makes it for, less smaller slices, I think at the end of the day,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
fine. I mean, it's like, I think it's the same for people that want to work in, professional sports or just these sexy businesses. They can command, they could command a
Mm.
lower margin, or they command a lower margin because people just want to be in it. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think going back to what you're saying about the apparel business, I mean, that was for the amount of people just wanted to be in it. It's an easy entry. You can kind of send a few emails, set up an Instagram account, and do a bit of create a Shopify account, and you've got a clothing brand. And for lots of people, the lowest barrier of entry into having a cycling business is apparel.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think at the very core, it's a fan-led sport, even in the industry.
Or
I
passionate
think
fans and passionate
passion,
people. Yeah.
yeah, who kind of, and again, it can go either way. Some of the best brands, let's say Steve Smith, for example, he's a brilliant, he's an absolute lover of the sport. Interesting with him, he doesn't really put himself front and facing. He's very respectful of the brand, Castelli, the family ownership. But at the core, he is that person at scale. But at the same time, I think it's something that's diluted the whole industry because of the saturation, because of the amount of people kind of getting involved, and
Yeah.
we've
And
lost a lot of that.
the direct to consumer has it how it lowered the barriers to entry has sort of diluted, especially in apparel. I'm trying to think if there's other. I mean, bikes a little bit. There are more bike
A
brands
little
now,
bit,
right?
yeah. Again, because you can just go to get an
Go
OEM
to
supplier,
Taiwan. Yeah.
go an open mold,
Yep. And go
and do a
for it.
bike. But I
But
mean,
it's more
I think
expensive. Definitely more
yeah,
expensive.
yeah, that's definitely more expensive. But again, it is similar. But yeah, so I think what has been, and again, and one of my learnings as well was the relationship with Brompton, which very much kind of that was just a fortuitous lunch that I had in London, and I met Will Butler Adams, and he introduced me to Brompton. And that was fascinating because Brompton, when I was talking before about the kind of when people put these decks together and they talk about the kind of the potential audience, etc., they kind of chuck in urban riding and kind of how big that can be. And going to Brompton, and they just do one product. They've got a couple more now, but effectively is one thing. And
That's a
they've been doing it for
fascinating
40
brand.
years. Yeah.
Fascinating brand.
And we as cyclists, we as from our very elitist road cycling world, think that kind of everything trickles down from us and everybody knows about us and we're the biggest thing in cycling. I went to Brompton, spent time with Paul Buckland. He had no idea what was going on in the world of pro cycling. No idea and no interest. It
Didn't need
was it was
to.
an it
Didn't
was
need to. Yep.
alternative universe.
Yep.
And it was a kind of as a wake up. It was like, oh my God, this is they're in that's a very big niche that they've got. You know, they've made over 1 million Bromptons, and they're kind of 100,000 at the peak. I think 100,000 a year they're making of those same bikes effectively with tweaks. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So that goes back to that one thing. You know, we kind of look at it, and it's that pie that we have of cycling. Each one of those, it's almost not a pie. I kind of used this analogy before, where there's this sort of, if you imagine this globe of the cycling industry, we're almost all little islands in sea. It's kind of we're very a lot of the time there's no sort of land connection,
So like
and yet
between
it's all
you
put
mean like
in.
mountain bike and road?
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely.
You go to if you were to go to the Whistler to the kind of downhill. But road cycling would have no idea. The majority of road cyclists have no idea just how insanely big the mountain biking scene is.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
it crushes sea otter. You know, if you go to like the Crank Brothers of Whistler and kind of check out all that stuff, and it's it's fascinating that and that all those people in the mountain biking world would have no idea about what's going on in the road cycling world. And then you go to urban, and they have no care for either of those either. And it's really interesting to kind of actually sort of see that and go, oh, it's very difficult to kind of form a land bridge kind of between those two. Because the moment you do it, you've then reduced the kind of your validity in that niche that you have,
Yeah,
and you're going to lose.
that's a super interesting point right there because it's like you can own you can be anything you want, but you
Yeah,
can't be everything, right? You can
exactly.
own one, but I don't
Hmm.
think people have enough room in their minds to own maybe two, right? It's really difficult.
Yeah, and they don't want to. You know, part of you want to go across to that different world. You want to kind of when you're in that, let's call it that island, you want to go there and you want to live and breathe it.
Yep,
You don't want to be
and you want to know
confused.
all the
Yeah,
rules, right? You got to
yeah,
know all the rules. Like,
yeah. I'll give you a personal example of this in the sense I'm not on social media much anymore. If people follow me on social media, they're following me because I'm a cyclist. They're not following me for my other interests. So if I'm putting other content on there that I think is interesting that I like, well, I don't think they kind of care about that. And there's a time I thought, oh, this is like, am I doing this for my kind of to show how interesting I am and the things I like? Well, actually, you've got to kind of come to terms with the fact that if people follow me, it's because within their universe of people they follow, when if my account, they want to go on there and see cycling stuff and probably prefer racing cycling stuff. So there's that. So understanding kind of what people want from you is really interesting. And that goes to the kind of industry as well. If I'm going to a brand, there's so many brands that I follow and like. I want to go to a brand. If I'm going to Salomon, it's for trail running. If I'm going to Factor, it's for the best bikes in the world. If I'm going to Brompton, it's for an urban folding bike. I kind of don't want to go. There are very few brands we can go into there, and it's a universe. The brand's so strong that it's a lot, kind of it transcends the kind of the products. But generally, and especially in the cycling world, those niches are really important because if I want to go to a mountain biking brand, I want to feel it's mountain biking. I kind of want to be like, I want it to be
yeah, you want,
authentic. I want it to be telling those stories. I want it to be I'm going to dip into the mountain biking universe. And if I'm going to a road cycling brand, I want it to be like pure road cycling. And it's really interesting. And that's how I feel as a customer.
well, I guess it makes me want to jump into when I first approached road cycling. we're kind of going off track here, but this is interesting because we're talking about niches. We're talking about how
Mm,
cycling brands are kind of positioned. This is about positioning. We're
mm.
talking about positioning.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember when I first approached cycling as like to road cycling, because I started on mountain bike and then I got into road cycling around 2012, 13. And I remember this unbelievable website that it was called the Velominati or something like that.
Oh yeah,
And
Frank.
the rules, it was called
Yeah,
The Rules.
yeah.
And this, I think, is the most succinct distillation of what a road cyclist I guess was in that moment of time where, and just to give people context, like there were just different rules, like you have your jersey or your shorts have to be black, your what are some other ones you can't wear,
I think that's like rule number 5 is like harden the fuck up.
harden
I
the
think
fuck
it's stuff.
up.
Yeah,
It was like this. And then like you can't wear team jerseys, like it's against, you can't
yeah.
wear unless it's your team. You can't wear a championship jersey unless you are the champion. But just like these very specific rules about
Mm.
road cycling. And I wonder, how relevant is that today, do you think? I think it's still pretty relevant, in my opinion.
I think it has to be relevant. I think that's what road cycling is. One of my partners in Chpt3 is James Carnes, who is the former head of strategy globally at Adidas, who came in and I was introduced, and he's one of the best designers I've ever met, just an incredible guy. And he came into this world and he was like, what the hell are all these rules? Kind of what you have to wear your glasses outside your helmet straps. You
That's
kind of
right.
you have and at first I was kind of like, oh yeah, you're right. But I said that's what makes it special. And I
It's
remember it's
tribal.
got,
It's
yeah,
tribal.
Frank, he did the Illuminati thing was brilliant because he did it as a satire. It was a satirical kind of take on road cycling during that boom, and kind of and and yet he was bang on. It was kind
It
of it was
wasn't
very
satire. It was
no,
it
yeah,
was dead right.
but and that was the irony because he'd done it as a sort of satirical little monograph, and it was actually bang on the rules, and people actually took it as this sort of as the commandments of road cycling, and it is, and that's what I love about it. I mean, it's what I love about. I am absolute. I'm pedantic regards all those things because that's part of why I love road cycling. I think it's a beautiful sport and it's elegant and that's our uniform. Similarly, I was at Châtel Bike Park downhill mountain biking with my son in August, and all the downhill mountain bikers were there, and they've got their own rules. It's totally different, but there's a look, and they kind of stand by it, and it's really cool. It's much more tilted towards kind of skating and that sort of thing. But every sport has its rules. It's just ours is so codified, and because there is such a simple look to it in many ways that it's easy to get it wrong. And if you get it wrong, then immediately you're not fitting in. And part of the kind of road cycle, as you said, tribal, you have to fit in. It's kind of, and you have to look good. You want to look like the pros, and the pros follow the rules. They are
That's
the kind of the beacons, the
but
kind
it
of how the rules are applied.
but it does keep it, exclusive in a
Mm,
sense. And obviously there are regional variations on this, and gravel is sort of
mm,
blurred
mm,
it a bit. But yeah, this is an amazing take on positioning, and something that, in your experience, you've seen that, to be successful in this business,
mm.
you do have to
Yeah,
pick a niche, and you have to go deep.
you have to go deep, and you have to kind of and again going to the business sense of it, we always because the niches are they have a ceiling. Let's be honest with you, it's not
Sure.
a
There's a
huge growth.
total
So
addressable audience, a TAM, a
so
total addressable
so
market.
every single, and you talk about investment coming into all these brands to do these things, and the only way they can increase their revenue is by breaking out of their niche and by diluting. And it's a mistake I've made, and so many other brands do, where it's like, oh, we've got to go for growth. We've got to get bigger. And the only way we can get bigger is breaking out of our niche, is trying to kind of is
It's a
bleed
catch
into these other
22.
areas.
It's a catch 22.
And and it's the most dangerous thing you can do, I think, in any domain, but especially in cycling, when, as you said, the fans, they are super dependent on the brand representing the rules and kind of and being there, as I said, use that term again, beacon for that niche in the sport. And the moment you bridge across into something else, it's like, well, what about the rules? What about, I don't think we were supposed to do that. And so it's a tightrope,
It's a
and you've
funny
got to be
business,
really
man.
careful.
It's a fun, I
Yeah,
presume,
it's
I mean, I've worked mostly in this, I'm kind of building this career in this business. I presume it's similar in other businesses, but I think that cycling, in a sense that it is disposable income, it's passion driven, it's not a commodity in any way,
mm,
that it's definitely more, extreme in this business. But I guess we're coming up on almost an hour here, David. I know we spoke a little
like
bit
that
about,
went quickly.
I know, right? I know we spoke a little bit about, so I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Chpt3, what's happening
Mm,
now. I
mm.
know it looks like you guys are have to wind it down, or what is going on there, if you can talk about it at all.
Yeah, no, I can. I mean, we're liquidating. It just got to the point where we couldn't pay, we couldn't sustain the business. It was unsustainable,
Okay.
and I could have gone out and looked for
More
investments and I got
investors.
my, but I just didn't. It just seemed like this doom loop, and for me personally, my personal financial situation wouldn't allow that. I mean, it's broken me, so I had to be pragmatic about it. And the bottom line is, again, through this journey of the past decade, I've learned what my skill set, if you like, my competencies. And my competencies are in design, creative, marketing, and they're not in P&L and sales and finance. It's not something. I mean, I learned enough of it, but it's not something I care enough about. That's not where my area of expertise is, and I could see that if we carried it on, then I was going to have to continue in that sort of founder, multifaceted role, which kind of I just didn't see that a way for me to kind of actually enjoy it. Which the whole point of Chpt3 was for it to be something that I could be passionate about and make a living from and do what I love. And with Chpt3, I was no longer doing what I loved. And with Mikkel, who's my partners, Mikkel and James. Mikkel's the most amazing guy, Danish guy. They've been so supportive through this, and they recognise the mistakes we've made. And the bottom line is, we've made enough mistakes and learned from them, but the collateral damage was too big. It's, I think at some point you've got to realise those mistakes. Yeah, we made them, we accept them, we recognise them. This has got nothing to do with the industry and its situation, because with hindsight, there was a huge opportunity that we missed. And so we made our mistakes, but unfortunately, those can't rectify them now. And I wasn't ready to. I need to start afresh in some way. I don't know what's going to happen with Chpt3 now. That might come out the other side somehow, and I can somehow just put it dormant and wait for another time. But yeah, at the moment, I kind of want to go and do something different and do what I love and take the learnings and apply it in a different way, which is what I'm doing, thankfully.
Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. It sounds really like an evolution and new opportunities coming your way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very fortunate because I do know so many people in the industry, and with Factor, with Rob Gentilis, he found out kind of before anybody else that I was doing this, and he just called me up straight away and he said, "Come to Factor." And I've known Rob since 2015, since he founded Factor, and been on their bike since I retired. My first bike out of professional cycling in 2015 was the first Factor, and it's lovely to go in there and be taking a marketing lead there. And this is really interesting in regards to the kind of the overall business of cycling. Going back to that one thing, uh, it's really hard in the apparel world to kind of distinguish on product, to kind of separate yourself, because there's innovation, etc. But most apparel brands are just built on brand. And whereas going to Factor now, it's the opposite. It's a product. They own their own factory. They're ruthless on making the best bikes in the world. And marketing has almost been a sort of afterthought. They built a beautiful brand through their product, but they haven't actually kind of told the story. They haven't kind of got out there, engaged with their customers. It's not been a high priority. They own a factory. They're a manufacturing company, and they really, I think, going into it now and seeing this blank slate and thinking, oh, we can take that sort of apparel attitude towards brand and marketing and apply it to a bike company is amazing, because they've got a product, And I think that's what's been lost a lot in the cycling industry as well, is that loss of product focus. Because brand in many ways is, it's not the vehicle to success now, because it's, you've got to have the product. I mean, a lot of these brands out there are kind of effectively built on a house of cards. But with Factor, you've got this foundation of kind of, they're making the best products in the world. And it's like, okay, this is actually going to be a lot simpler. This is actually real. This is authentic. This is kind of the real deal. We're not having to make up stories and build communities and tribes. We just got to talk about what we make and kind of, and what it's used for, and why riding a Factor is like flying on the ground. It's like the most incredible experience you'll have on a bike. And we're passionate about that. And I was like, okay, this is fun. This is interesting, because we're doing it for the right reasons. You know, we're not kind of, this is solid foundations to kind of build something on. And that's really exciting. And I'm kind of, and again, it's mad. I love bikes. And it's like, actually, when it comes down to it, we can build all these brand stories and do all these different things, but ultimately it's the bike that's the vehicle. That's the thing that's creating the experience, the emotions, taking you places, allowing you to do things. And yeah, so it's kind of nice having a much simpler core reason for kind of talking about something for, and being passionate about it.
Well, that's awesome, man. I'm really will be definitely following you, continuing to follow this journey. I guess if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
Just hit me up, direct message me on socials. It's, yeah, I'm on and off, so don't expect it. They're kind of, the
Okay.
apps aren't on my phone, so I sort of check it on my computer occasionally. So, but that's the best way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, David. I really appreciate you having taken the time and talking with me today. And I want to wish you a Merry Christmas in the meantime.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you.
Okay. Take care.